Greetings from the Grover Beach Church of Christ. I'm Rob Redden, the minister of the church, and I'm very pleased to be able to bring you another lesson from God's holy word. Today, let's study together more about anger. Last week we talked about the evil side of anger. Today we want to address how anger can be used for good. The Apostle Paul admits that anger is a natural emotion. In and of itself, anger is not sinful. God got angry, and I'm sure he's still angry at sin. Jesus got angry. And so the context determines whether anger is sinful or not. Notice what Paul says in Ephesians 4:26. Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. First, Paul admits that one should be allowed to get angry. And this is called a permissive imperative. He's not commanding it, he's just allowing it as long as it does not lead to sin. An example of permissive imperative is this. Mom, can I go to the movies with Susie? She responds, go ahead. Now, go ahead is in the form of an imperative, but it's just giving permission. And this is how Paul is using the imperative, be angry, in this verse. But it is sad that some people repress their anger because they seem to feel it's always sinful to be angry. And each time they experience anger, this emotion brings with it a false sense of guilt. Of course, there is sinful anger, but it's not the emotion that makes it sinful. It's the variables associated with it, as we noticed in the previous lesson last week. Second, we find that Jesus is a perfect example of righteous indignation. Let's read the account in John 2:13 through 17. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Now, let's just pause here and examine Jesus' behavior. Some may say he didn't have the right to express his anger in this fashion. But I beg to disagree and remind people that Jesus was the Son of God and is the Son of God. And he had authority on earth to rectify wrongs as he deemed fit. Now, we may not have the authority to do such a thing, but he did. So the lesson isn't justification to burn down a police department because one of their officers killed a suspect during an arrest. But what it does show us is that there is a place for righteous indignation against the evils we see. I believe in peaceful demonstrations. The Constitution guarantees that right. And I believe that it may be a way of expressing righteous indignation. But when the protesters block highways, it is no longer peaceful or righteous. It is interfering with the rights and freedoms of others to have a free way to their destination, which may be to their job or to the doctor or the hospital or to the side of a dying loved one. Such actions show a selfish disregard for the rights of others, the very thing they are protesting about. What hypocrisy. Anger, even righteous anger, does not justify revenge. And if it occurs, then one may be sure that that anger was not righteous. The provocation of anger may be justified, but that does not give anyone the right to retaliate which only makes things worse. You know, it is easy to determine what is righteous and what is not righteous indignation if we were Jesus Christ. But we're not. And so it's not that easy to determine what is righteous and what is unrighteous indignation. We often want to justify our actions either before they occur or after they occur. Self-justification is a weakness we all seek, even when we're wrong. If we want to rain on somebody's parade because we're angry, then our motive is not pure. But what caused Jesus' righteous indignation anyway? You know, many professions are legitimate in their own domain, but not legitimate in other domains. For example, herding cattle to the auction is a legitimate business, but to herd them down Main Street to the auction house is not legitimate. Also, if a church sold items for the Lord's Supper in the foyer of the church building, it would be merchandising the worship to Almighty God. The grocery store and church supplies businesses is a legitimate domain to sell the bread and the fruit of the vine for the Lord's Supper. Now, I think that's very clear. You see the parallel with what Jesus did. The people who came long distances to Jerusalem to worship would not bring their cattle or sheep for sacrifice. They would purchase these in or near Jerusalem. Some of the poor would only have enough to purchase the birds for sacrifice. Plus, those who needed to pay the annual temple tax would have to exchange their Roman money for Jewish money according to the law. These money changers would charge a fee for the exchange. Thus, this was a very profitable business and susceptible to fraud. Now, there was nothing immoral about selling people sheep, goats, bulls, or birds for sacrifice. There was nothing wrong with providing a money exchange so people could pay the temple tax. But it is wrong for them to sell and exchange money in the temple, as it would be for anyone to set up a table in the foyer of a church building to sell people the items of the Lord's Supper. This provoked righteous anger, and he sought to right the wrong. Jesus' anger did not result in harming anyone. I'm sure they were upset by what he did, but they weren't harmed. Well, now let's put this together. We can be good and mad. Actually, I believe God expects us to get angry at the evil in the world. When was the last time you were angry at the evil in the world? When was the last time evil made you mad? When did the behavior of others provoke feelings of anger because of their immoral actions? If nothing makes you angry, just maybe you need to worry about becoming jaded by the evils of others. Sometimes we get the feeling that we can't do anything about it, so why waste the frustration of getting angry? But this is a bit short-sighted, I believe. There's always something to do, even if it is writing your senator, representatives, or your mayor, or your principal, or your CEO, and so forth. Anger may move someone to stand up against the evils of society. I am sure that Martin Luther King was angry at the injustices against his people, and that anger moved him to stand up against those evils in society, but he did it in a peaceful way. I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Well, secondly, like Jesus, we must focus our anger on behaviors, events, or evils. Anger, like love, is an extraordinary, strong emotion, and it needs to move to action. But the action cannot be vengeful, retaliation, or an eye for an eye, a tit for a tat. I recently saw a cartoon with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Bugs Bunny was carrying a sign that read duck season, and Daffy Duck was carrying a sign that read rabbit season. I think that captures the idea quite well, don't you agree? To be good and mad, We must be able, as anger builds, to maintain control over our rational faculties. Jesus obviously thought through his actions before he acted. We must ask ourselves, are my motives pure? Or am I wanting just to vent my anger at the expense of others? Our anger may help convince us that something must be done. It may be best to wait until the anger subsides to put our plan into motion. Thirdly, we must know that the provocation of anger merits our anger. Is it just a difference of opinion and you happen to struggle with tolerance? Or is it an evil? Is it the stupidity of people? Do you lose patience with intolerant people? I often jokingly say, I'm intolerant of intolerant people. Well, the proverbial finger pointing means 3 fingers are pointing back at me. Or is our anger due to our being judgmental? Well, let me say a few words about being judgmental. It's tossed around loosely to condone evil in all its ugly forms. It is true that judgmental people are harder on others than they are on themselves. And it is also true that some of the loudest spokespeople for the "you shouldn't judge" crowd are the worst offenders. If I stand for something that God teaches about right and wrong, and I say the Bible condemns such, I'm not judging. I'm showing my understanding of plain Scripture and showing my approval of its teaching, which results in disapproval of sin. A Christian is often judged as being judgmental, even if he quotes a verse that condemns a certain sin. The Bible does not condemn all judging. It tells us in John 7:24, the very words of Jesus, do not judge by appearance, but judge righteous judgment. The passage that warns against unfair judging in Matthew 7:1 following also records Jesus' words shortly thereafter when he says, do not give that which is holy to the dogs, or cast our pearls before swine. These metaphors of people are living like dogs and hogs. Read it for yourself. Don't stop with the judging statement. Read on through. In verse 20 it says, how are we going to determine the dogs and the hogs from those that are not? By their fruits you shall know them, says Jesus. You know, to be good and mad, we must distinguish between sin and the sinner. God loves sinners, but he hates their sin. We too must make a distinction, and this isn't as easy as it is to say, especially if you were the target of evil. But until we can separate the two, we will never be really evangelistic. In other words, if you hate the sinner, you will not seek to save his soul from the eternal fires of hell. Well, let's look at an enlightening and informative account which illustrates my next point, that anger should move one to reprove evil. Paul had been arrested in Jerusalem, which actually saved his life from a mob of angry Jews. Later, the Roman captain took this Jew, Paul, to the Jewish court that gathered to investigate the accusations made against Paul. We read in chapter 23, and looking intently at the council, Paul said, brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law you order me to be struck? Those who stood by said, would you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of the people. Placed before the Sanhedrin, Paul claimed his innocence, which he had every right to do. He says, brothers, I have lived as a citizen before God with all good conscience to this very day. in verse 1. His claim of innocence insulted the high priest. Knowing this man's character, it isn't a surprise that the high priest immediately ordered him to strike Paul. His action was completely in keeping with the character presented by Josephus, the Jewish contemporary of Paul and historian, who depicted him as one of the very worst of high priests, known for his pro-Roman sentiments, his extreme cruelty, and his greed. Paul's angry response is altogether understandable. God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, verse 3. His words were prophetic. We learned that less than 10 years later, Ananias came to an untimely end at the hand of the Jewish freedom fighters. Now, the image of this whitewashed wall was very appropriate, expressing the sheer hypocrisy of this man who stood there in his fine priestly garments, symbolic of the role of intercessor between God and the people. His character and actions disgrace the role of a priest. Jesus used the same imagery to depict hypocrisy, referring to the practice of whitewashing tombs as a warning to people that the defilement of dead men's bones lay within, Matthew 23. And so Paul saw Ananias' action in having him struck as proof of the high priest's hypocrisy. There he sat in his role of judge, yet he was himself in need of judgment because his striking Paul was clearly against the law. No verdict had been reached, no deliberations even begun, and yet the action of the high priest had already pronounced judgment against Jewish justice, Leviticus 19 and verse 15. It was then that Paul pointed out that it was pointed out to Paul that this was God's high priest he had reviled. The emphasis is now being turned from the representative that focuses upon the man to the role. And in that respect, Paul's demeanor changed as well. We may wonder whether Paul really did recognize the high priest or not. It may be that his vision was compromised. And he says, I did not realize that he was high priest, in verse 5. But most likely, Paul may have said this in irony. He didn't act like a high priest should. How could I recognize him as such when he wasn't acting like the high priest? Now that the focus was on the role, Paul made clear that he respected the office, and he had quoted Exodus 22:28 to underscore that he did respect God's representatives in accordance with the law. He was a law-abiding Jew in every respect. Paul's anger was against the unjust treatment before the Jewish court. He saw the end of this wicked priest, and standing up against such evil is a message for us. God doesn't expect us to be doormats of the world, but with controlled anger call a spade a spade. We may influence others by being convicted of the truth for which we stand. Some would criticize Paul, but they forget that Jesus promised the apostles not to worry what they were to say before the tribunes, but that God will give them the words to say, and thus I believe Paul was inspired to utter these words. Notice what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, 7 through 20. But beware of men, for they will hand you over to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be even brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they hand you over, do not worry about how or what you will say. For it will be given you in that hour what you are to say. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. From this we learn that the Apostle Paul before the court was given the words to speak on this occasion. God used his anger to rebuke the wicked priest. He did not sin because the man was not worthy to be high priest. You know, in Ephesians 5:11, we're told to reprove sinners, Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. But we must be careful when we try to point out the evil deeds of others, that we don't allow our anger to become the focus of our hearers. I read of a preacher who had anger issues, and often in the pulpit he would pound the lectern and scold his members in harsh tones. He may have thought he was getting his point across, but all he was doing was discrediting himself to his listeners. They couldn't see the truth because of the anger, if there was any truth. We must speak the truth in love, says Paul in Ephesians 4 and verse 15. It's wise to memorize James 1, 19 through 20, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. We must weigh our words. Will they be helpful or will they be hurtful? Do I just want to vent my frustration, or I'm deeply concerned about the issue at hand? Can I say what's on my heart without demeaning and demoralizing the other person? Am I the right person to say what's on my heart? We must be angry for the right reason and not because we're irritable, depressed, ill, or hurt. We must also be careful that our anger is controlled anger. We must remain rational and not lose our cool, and say things by weighing the effects of our words. We often are not aware of how powerful our words are. And we need to examine our vocabulary and root out the derogatory and inflammatory, the insulting words that we often use when we are upset or mad. And so we may take the high road as far as responding to something in anger, but our vocabulary betrays us. We must be very careful. Furthermore, what about our body language? Do we slam doors and throw things when we're mad? Do we make a fist and fling our arms out? Well, then we're not being good and mad. We're just being mad. And I doubt that that's righteous anger. Now I'm going to meddle a little bit. Do you get angry driving a car? Do others pull your strings? Are you a marionette who's controlled by other people's actions? To be good and mad, we must not be easily provoked. As a matter of fact, one of Paul's definitions of love in 1 Corinthians 13:5 is that it's not easily angered, according to the NIV translation. And so, if we reduce this lesson to one main rule to guarantee that when we become angry that we are good and mad, it is love. If you really love others, you'll be angry for the right reasons and in the right manner. If I need to blow off steam, I go work out, punch my speed bag, and of course pray. And no, I don't put somebody's picture on my speed bag, as someone asked one time. Christians must learn to have short memories. To use Paul's words out of context, of course, in Philippians 3, we must forget the things that are behind. Focus forward. Remember, holding a grudge causes misery and unhappiness. It robs the Christian of his or her joy, puts one in a rut of unproductiveness that is unbecoming of a Christian serving the Lord. Listen, the Lord didn't say it would be easy. Setting the bar high makes us work harder. And if we're not aspiring to reach higher in our Christian character, we're not really pleasing God. It's just that simple. The Lord will give us strength. He will provide us the way of escape, and we can control our anger, and we can direct it in the right way. We must crucify self, our pride, and not be so fragile and take things so personally. People say things without thinking, just as you and I do. A brother criticized me for some of my Facebook posts in a very unchristian way the other day. I told him that I didn't appreciate his attitude, but I will learn something even from one who displayed a hostile attitude in his criticism. There's probably some truth in what he said, but how he did it could have set off a knee-jerk response from me. But I know how to handle such things. I'm not always good at it, but I'm aware of it. Sometimes we want to protect our pride and retaliate. That's not what the Lord wants from me or from you. God allows us to be angry, but he wants us to be good and mad. Shall we pray? Holy Father, you're angry at sin, and yet you love the sinner. Help us to learn from you how to do both in the right spirit and the right attitude, so that our anger will accomplish good rather than evil. We need your gift of wisdom, Father, to manage our emotions so that our behavior will bless others rather than harm them. And we ask this in Jesus' precious name. Amen. You know, I want to thank you for listening today, and I hope you have a wonderful Lord's Day. We will be meeting in the parking lot of the Grover Beach Church of Christ today for worship at 11 o'clock. Come join us. If the Lord wills, we will be back here for another message next Sunday. God bless you and have a wonderful day.